6:14 a.m., March 19th, 2026. Houston, Texas. 14 HSI vehicles moved in staggered formation down the 610 South Loop, headlights off, engines near idle. The lead driver counted overpasses. 3, 2, 1. At the same moment, 400 miles north, a second team sat staged outside a warehouse complex on the southern edge of Dallas. Engines off, radio silence. Total value of goods moved through this network over 18 years, $74 million, 11 shell companies, 3 layers of intermediaries, and 1 federal warrant, signed in 2008, sitting sealed in a filing system ever since. The man named in that warrant had been in Houston the whole time. He never left. He just became someone else. 11 times, inside the same city, under the same federal jurisdiction that had been looking for him. This is the file that almost went cold for good. The first anomaly was logged by a U.S. Customs and Border Protection officer at Miami International Airport on August 3, 2008. A cargo shipment from Dubai had been routed through Frankfurt, declared as commercial audio-visual equipment. 47 line items. Declared value, $186,000. The CBP officer pulled a secondary inspection. 2 items didn't match the manifest. They were field programmable gate arrays, FPGAs, integrated circuits with dual-use applications, prohibited for export to Iran under the Export Administration regulations then in force. The shipper of record was a Texas LLC registered 6 months earlier, Meridian Technical Exports. Registered agent address, a commercial mailbox service in southwest Houston. CBP referred the file to Homeland Security Investigations. Miami HSI opened case 0844 MIA 2008 within 48 hours. The agent assigned to the initial workup was a 12-year customs enforcement veteran. He ran the corporate registration. Meridian Technical Exports had been incorporated in Delaware in February 2008. No website, no listed employees, no physical office. What it had was a federal employer identification number, a Chase business account, and a pattern of wire transfers from a correspondent account at a bank in Dubai. 3 transfers in 6 months. Total inflow, $247,000. Total outflow, $244,500. Remaining balance at time of inspection, $2,500. The EIN traced to a naturalized U.S. citizen. Date of naturalization, October 2001. Country of origin, Iran. The sealed case file listed his name as Cyrus Amiri. Amiri had come to the United States in 1998 on a student visa. He attended the University of Houston, completed a degree in electrical engineering, and stayed. He had a Texas driver's license, a mortgage in the Milan neighborhood, a domestic bank account showing routine activity, grocery stores, gas stations, 2 car payments. Nothing flagged him to conventional law enforcement. I spent time with the early surveillance logs from that period. One thing kept standing out. This wasn't a profile that drew attention. It was built specifically not to. The 2008 HSI investigation assembled a reasonable circumstantial case. Amiri was the sole signatory on the Meridian Technical Exports corporate account. The Dubai wire transfers came from an entity HSI's international liaison had flagged in a separate 2006 investigation, a known procurement intermediary for Iranian military-affiliated buyers. The FPGAs in the Miami shipment were consistent with components used in guidance and navigation systems. A federal magistrate issued a sealed arrest warrant for Amiri on November 14, 2008. By November 20th, the warrant couldn't be served. Amiri had liquidated the Chase account. Meridian Technical Exports was dissolved through the Delaware Secretary of State's office that same week. The Houston mortgage had been paid off in a lump sum transfer 1 month earlier. The Milan property was listed for sale. Cyrus Amiri, for all practical federal purposes, ceased to exist. The Miami HSI field office maintained the file through 2009. In 2010, with no new leads and the primary subject unlocatable, the case was designated inactive. The arrest warrant stayed sealed and valid. Federal arrest warrants don't expire, but the active file was transferred to OFAC's cold case tracking system. It sat there through 2 complete federal case cycle reviews in 2014 and 2019, without reactivation. 18 years. 3 presidential administrations. 4 OFAC directors. The same warrant, untouched. What nobody knew, Amiri had moved approximately 3 miles. He hadn't left the country. He hadn't even changed cities. He sold the Milan house and rented a property in Bel Air, just inside the city limit, under a different name. He kept operating in Houston. He just stopped being Cyrus Amiri in any document that touched a federal database. He paid rent in money orders. He drove an older vehicle registered to a relative. Neighbors knew him as a quiet man who kept irregular hours, came and went without routine, and didn't discuss his work. In 18 years, not one formal complaint was filed at any of his residential addresses. Here's what this tells us about how federal cold case infrastructure actually works. A warrant freezes at the moment the subject disappears. The investigative machinery moves on. Budgets shift. Case officers rotate. What remains is a file number and a sealed warrant in a system that no longer has anyone actively looking. Amiri understood this, or someone had explained it to him. The reconstruction of the network's 18-year operational history comes almost entirely from financial records, corporate filings, and one seized device. Here's what those documents show. Between 2009 and 2026, HSI investigators documented 11 separate limited liability companies incorporated in Texas, Delaware, and Nevada. Each had a different name. Each listed a different registered agent. Each operated between 14 months and 6 years before being dissolved and replaced. The sequence: Meridian Technical Exports, dissolved 2008. Then a Nevada LLC called Suncrest Global Distribution, active 2009 to 2011. Then a Delaware entity, Hallmark Component Solutions, 2011 to 2014. Then Gulf States Procurement Partners, a Texas LLC, 2014 to 2016. Each dissolved before federal compliance monitoring cycles typically flagged dormant entities for review. The commodity profile shifted over time. Early shipments focused on integrated circuits and signal processing components. After 2014, the network started routing requests for fiber optic switching hardware, industrial sensor arrays, and precision measurement instruments. All with legitimate commercial uses, but also documented applications in Iranian industrial and military programs under OFAC sanctions. The routing pattern was consistent. A US shell entity purchased from domestic suppliers or East Asian manufacturers. Goods were consolidated at third-party warehouse facilities, never the same one twice. Then reshipped through UAE or Turkish intermediaries to final destinations HSI analysts couldn't fully trace. Financial throughput was modest by sanctions evasion standards. No single transaction exceeded $400,000. Most ranged between $40,000 and $180,000. The cumulative total across 18 years, reconstructed from bank records obtained through subpoena and international legal assistance treaties, came to approximately $74 million at declared value. The actual value to end users was almost certainly higher. Dual-use components routed through multiple intermediaries typically carry a 300 to 500% markup by the time they reach sanctioned buyers. You'd think 18 years of transactions would leave a visible pattern. It didn't, and the reason is methodical. Amiri's operational discipline was near total. He never used the same LLC for more than 6 years. He never listed himself as a corporate officer in any filing after 2008. He paid personal expenses in cash or through family members' accounts. He held no property in his own name after 2008, no social media. His cell phone, when investigators finally traced it, was a prepaid device purchased at a Houston Walmart in October 2025. The thread that unraveled everything wasn't found in Houston. It was found at sea, December 11th, 2025. The Strait of Hormuz, international waters. A US Navy guided missile destroyer on patrol under the reimposed Hormuz blockade interdicted a commercial cargo vessel sailing under Iranian flag. The Satara-e Khalij, the Gulf Star, a mid-sized general cargo ship with a manifest listing agricultural equipment bound for an Omani port. The boarding team found no weapons. They found discrepancies in the cargo manifest. 3 containers were listed as empty. None of them were. The containers held mixed commercial goods: electrical hardware, medical supplies, industrial spare parts, and crew personal effects. Standard procedure required cataloguing all electronic devices. The team recovered 4 cell phones. 3 were ordinary consumer devices. The 4th was a burner phone registered to a crew member listed on the manifest as a cook. It contained a single encrypted messaging application. The application had been cleared of most content, but the deletion was incomplete. 14 message threads remained partially recoverable through the Navy's onboard forensic system. Most of the recovered messages were commercial: shipping logistics, pricing discussions, payment confirmation codes. One thread was different. It contained a procurement request for a specific batch of field programmable gate arrays. The request referenced a Texas LLC as the fulfillment point. The company name was Lone Star Electronic Solutions. The Navy's intelligence team forwarded the device and forensic extract to HSI's Houston field office on December 17, 2025. On January 4, 2026, an HSI analyst searched the company name in the Texas Secretary of State's commercial database, Lone Star Electronic Solutions. Texas LLC, incorporated 2022. Registered agent, a commercial forwarding service on the west side of Houston. Status, active. The analyst ran the registered agent address against HSI's internal database. The same forwarding address had appeared in 3 previous HSI case files. The oldest was case 0844 MIA 2008. The analyst pulled the archived file. Read the warrant. Checked the current status. Still valid. Still sealed. Issued November 14th, 2008. The HSI Houston field office supervisor was notified at 11:47 p.m. on January 4th, 2026. By morning, the case was formally reactivated. By the end of the week, a joint task force had assembled. HSI, OFAC, the FBI's Counterintelligence Division, and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Texas. The man named in the 2008 warrant was still in Houston. Most people assume cold case reactivations mean the hard work is already done, that you pick up where the original investigation left off. The evidence tells a different story. The 2008 file was nearly unusable for evidentiary purposes. Witnesses had died, moved, or lost contact. Bank records beyond standard retention periods had been destroyed. The original case agent had retired. Physical evidence from the Miami seizure had been processed through the standard disposal cycle. The reactivated team had 3 things: the 2008 warrant, the Lone Star Electronic Solutions corporate filing, and a burner phone pulled from a cargo ship in the Strait of Hormuz. They started from there. The first surveillance action was confirming that Lone Star Electronic Solutions was operationally active. An HSI analyst posing as a supply chain procurement manager called the company's listed number on January 9th, 2026. The call was answered. The man who answered said his name was David Nasseri. He described himself as operations director. He quoted prices for industrial components and provided a bank account number for wire transfer. The account was at a Houston branch of a national commercial bank, held in the name of Lone Star Electronic Solutions. The authorized signatory on the bank's internal records was listed as David Nasseri. A Texas ID matched that name. Facial recognition run against the ID photo by HSI's document forensics unit returned a low-confidence match to Cyrus Amiri's 2001 naturalization photo, the only federal record with a verified image of him. The match was inconclusive. It was enough to justify continued surveillance. What agents didn't know yet was that Lone Star Electronic Solutions was just the newest layer of something that went much deeper. HSI's financial intelligence unit began pulling records. Lone Star's bank account showed wire transfer activity dating to 2019 from a now-dissolved Delaware entity, the 10th in the sequence. The pattern was identical, a corporate chain built to look like separate, unrelated businesses linked through a recurring set of transactional relationships. 6 weeks of financial analysis mapped 9 of the 11 entities in retrospect. The total throughput across all entities in all years came to the $74 million figure OFAC would later confirm in the indictment. One detail that stuck with the lead analyst: the amounts were always just below thresholds, triggering automatic Bank Secrecy Act reporting requirements, not randomly. The specific structuring was consistent enough that investigators concluded it was deliberate from the first transaction in 2008. The first obstacle emerged in early February 2026. The surveillance team had located a physical address associated with Amiri, a rental in Houston's Montrose neighborhood, listed in the name of a property management LLC that also couldn't be tied directly to him in public records. Placing him at that address for warrant purposes required visual confirmation. The surveillance team maintained a fixed observation point for 11 consecutive days. Amiri, or the man they believed to be Amiri, never appeared. The rental was occupied. Mail was collected. Lights ran on a timer. But the subject wasn't sleeping there. He appeared to be rotating between at least 2 other locations HSI hadn't yet identified. On February 14th, 2026, the surveillance team's lead agent authorized a broader location effort using geolocation data from a court order on the prepaid phone number associated with Lone Star Electronic Solutions. The data placed the phone at 3 distinct Houston area locations on a rotating basis. 2 were residential addresses in different neighborhoods. 1 was a commercial storage facility in the West Chase district. They had the pattern. They needed a lock. On February 19th, 2026, HSI's undercover analyst called Lone Star Electronic Solutions again. This time, she expressed interest in a large volume order, enough to require an in-person meeting to finalize specifications. Amiri, operating as Nasseri, agreed. The meeting was set for February 26th at the company's commercial address. The meeting lasted 47 minutes. It was recorded under a Title III authorization from the Southern District. Amiri, as Nasseri, discussed components, quoted pricing, and at one point referenced shipping routes through third-country intermediaries with enough specificity that OFAC sanctions compliance analysts later determined the conversation alone established knowing violations of the Iranian transactions and sanctions regulations. He also mentioned, without any apparent concern, that he'd been in the import-export business for a long time. More than 15 years. Never had a compliance problem. The undercover analyst noted in her debrief, he seemed genuinely relaxed. He offered coffee. He asked about her company's growth plans. At no point in 47 minutes did his demeanor shift toward caution. Investigators who reviewed the recording later called it the most telling detail in the file. A man so confident in his operational cover that a federal recording device across a conference table registered as no threat whatsoever. Here's the take that will probably draw some disagreement. 18 years isn't a failure of the warrant system. It's a failure of institutional continuity. The warrant was valid. The subject was traceable. What lapsed was attention. Federal cold case infrastructure is resourced for archival, not active pursuit. This network operated in that gap for nearly 2 decades because no one's budget included the cost of looking. That's worth sitting with. By early March 2026, the investigative picture was complete enough for the U.S. Attorney's Office to proceed. The charging document listed 15 counts: violations of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, money laundering, conspiracy to violate the Export Administration regulations, and making false statements to federal investigators. The last based on statements Amiri made during the 2008 customs inquiry before the original warrant was issued. The raid was planned for March 19th, 2026. What do you think? Does an 18-year gap between warrant and arrest represent a failure of the federal system? Or is this just how cold case justice works? There's no clean answer. Drop your read in the comments. The second obstacle surfaced 12 days before the operation. HSI received intelligence from a financial institution's compliance department, triggered by a currency transaction report filed in connection with the investigation, that one of the known LLC bank accounts had seen unusual activity. A wire transfer of $340,000 had been initiated toward a correspondent bank in Oman. If the transfer completed before the operation, it would reduce the recoverable asset base and potentially alert network members overseas to an imminent enforcement action. The team had 72 hours. The U.S. Attorney's Office applied for an emergency civil asset forfeiture restraining order. The order was granted within 18 hours. The transfer was blocked. The $340,000 stayed in the account. But the restraining order request, processed through the bank's legal department, had touched a system Amiri's network might have had visibility into. The lead HSI supervisor faced a decision: accelerate the timeline by 48 hours or hold. The supervisor held. The risk assessment concluded the network had no direct line into the bank's legal processing system. The original date would stand. The risk was real. The call was judgment. March 19th, 2026, 6:14 a.m. Houston time. The operation hit 7 simultaneous entry points in the Houston metro area and 4 warehouse locations in the Dallas-Fort Worth corridor. 11 sites total, matching the 11 LLC entities in the network. The Houston entries were the primary focus. HSI tactical teams, operating with FBI SWAT elements, executed federal search warrants at the Lone Star Electronic Solutions registered address, the Montrose rental property, the West Chase storage facility, and 4 additional locations identified through the 6-week surveillance operation. The Dallas entries targeted warehouse facilities used as transshipment points. Agents found approximately $2, $3 million in electronics inventory, 12 pallets of packaged shipments staged for dispatch, and financial records covering portions of the network's operational history. At the West Chase storage facility, Amiri's primary document storage point, investigators recovered physical records from 9 of the 11 LLCs, paper filings, corporate resolutions, bank statements, and shipping manifests covering nearly a decade of operations. The paper records were the evidentiary anchor the 2008 file had never established. All 11 sites were entered within a 19-minute window. Amiri was not at any of the Houston locations. At 6:09 a.m., 5 minutes before the primary entries began, an alert had gone out to all federal law enforcement contacts in the Southern District. The subject of the 2008 warrant, believed to be operating as Dawood Nazeri, was flagged at George Bush Intercontinental Airport. Ticket purchased the previous evening. Destination: Doha, Qatar. Departure: 7:45 a.m. The airport alert reached CBP at Terminal E at the same moment the Houston teams crossed their thresholds. 2 CBP officers and 1 HSI agent at Terminal E found Amiri at Gate 27 at 6:22 a.m. He was seated, carry-on bag at his feet, reviewing documents on a laptop. He didn't run. He didn't resist. The HSI agent identified herself and informed him she was serving an arrest warrant. She read the warrant number. Case 0844, MIA 2008. Amiri said nothing for approximately 4 seconds. Then, that was a long time ago. The warrant had been signed on November 14th, 2008. It was served on March 19th, 2026. 18 years, 4 months, and 5 days. Put yourself in the position of that CBP officer at Gate 27. You're holding a warrant issued before smartphones existed, naming a man who has been undetectable in a city of 2. 3 million for nearly 2 decades, and you're standing in front of him 40 minutes before his flight. The case file in your hand is older than some of your colleagues' careers. That's what a cold warrant looks like when it finally comes in. The charging document filed in the Southern District of Texas on March 19th, 2026 listed Cyrus Amiri, both names on the indictment, as the principal in a sanctions evasion network that had operated continuously from 2008 through the date of arrest. The government's total estimated value of goods routed to sanctioned end users, $74 million. According to the OFAC assessment included in the indictment, the network served buyers affiliated with procurement channels used by IRGC-linked entities. The specific end use of the components couldn't be fully established. The forensic extraction from the Strait of Hormuz phone provided one confirmed order. Investigators assessed there were more. The third obstacle emerged during post-arrest review. As investigators processed the West Chase storage facility records, they found a category of transactions that didn't correspond to any of the 11 documented LLCs. A separate set of wire transfer records, covering 2017 to 2019, referenced a corporate name that hadn't appeared anywhere in HSI's research: Apex Meridian Technologies, incorporated in a jurisdiction the records didn't specify. Searches of the obvious jurisdictions: Delaware, Nevada, Texas, Wyoming, returned nothing. The corporate records for Apex Meridian Technologies have not been located as of the indictment filing date. The $9 million in wire transfers referenced in those records has not been fully traced. Court records show that Amiri declined to provide information about Apex Meridian Technologies during initial processing. His attorney subsequently filed a notice of intent to assert Fifth Amendment protections regarding that entity specifically. There's a line in the indictment that reads almost like fiction. The defendant asserts no knowledge of the referenced entity. 11 shell companies. 18 years of documented operations. And for this one, no knowledge. The case produced one arrest, a significant asset seizure, and the closure of a warrant open since the second term of the George W. Bush administration. What it hasn't produced is a complete accounting of the network's scope. 4 of the downstream intermediaries identified in the indictment remain outside U.S. jurisdiction. The end users of the components have not been publicly identified. The Apex Meridian Technologies question is unresolved. The burner phone from the Gulf Star produced forensic data pointing to a second network contact, referred to in the records only by a numerical identifier. That contact has not been identified. If this case raises a question, it isn't whether the federal warrant system works. Clearly it does, even across 18 years. The question is, what else is sitting in cold file systems, waiting for a phone to wash up on a Navy boarding operation? Will there be another case like this in the next 5 years? Comment why yes or no, because the answer probably depends on how much you trust institutional memory. The warrant was served. The file is active again. The broader network that moved components for 18 years has not been dismantled. A federal arrest satisfies a legal requirement. It doesn't fill the gap that the procurement served. The network is down. The need that built it is still there. If you want to follow the Southern District proceeding, the sentencing, the asset forfeiture hearing, the open questions around Apex Meridian, subscribe. The next filing date is 60 days from arraignment. When it moves, we'll cover it. The warrant was signed in 2008. It was served in 2026. Somewhere in that span, components moved through 11 shell companies toward buyers whose identities remain partially sealed. The file was opened. The warrant was served. The demand is still there.